I have the pleasure of reintroducing a longtime friend of AAHOA, Cindy Estis Green. She's co-founder and CEO of Kalibri Labs. So as Cindy spoke this morning during the general session, Kalibri Labs is working on the demystifying of the digital marketplace market research. And in part with AAHOA as one of the sponsors, they're working on ways to find solutions to help drive revenue to our hoteliers. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Cindy. Let's give her a warm AAHOA welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm going to come down, get a little closer to everyone here. So some of you may have heard me earlier this morning talk about the Book Direct campaigns and how the member rates and the different brand campaigns to try to get consumers to book on the Brandcom website rather than choosing the OTA website, how that's working. So I'm going to talk a little about that, but I'm going to talk as well about what's happening in the digital marketplace in general and how the business has shifted and what the overall picture looks like for the US hotel industry. You know, where is the business coming from? How much are you all paying to get it? And what does it look like across the whole swath of the hotel types? So, and then I'll definitely allow time for questions because I know there will be some because it's a pretty dynamic marketplace and there's a lot changing. And you're paying a lot of money to get your business, and you probably want to know as much as possible about what you can do to either reduce those costs or do something to either improve the revenue or reduce the cost. But it's really about improving profit contribution, not so much the revenue as much as profit contribution. As you have heard, there's a book called Demystifying the Digital Marketplace, and AAHOA is one of our big sponsors. AAHOA was a sponsor of the study that was done 5 years ago that was sort of the first version of the study. And we've been able to gather data from over 25,000 hotels in order to take all of the stay data and the cost of sales data. We have brands, small brands, independents, all included in that data. It represents somewhere between 5 and 10 billion transactions because we take every single guest day. We look at it every single day. We look at all the revenue, how the booking was made, and then all the costs associated with those bookings. And we gather all that information. Right now, it's a little over 25,000 hotels. We're adding data. We should probably end up close to 30,000 within about 3 months. So externally, we also get data from Airbnb. So we get supply and demand data from Airbnb. We get consumer review data to look at what the differences are by the reviews that hotels are getting. And we have all the loyalty information to know how much loyalty business every hotel is getting by brand, by hotel type, everything like that. And this book was released, the first part of it was released in September, and that kind of gave the big picture of who the players were. Part 2 was just released. You would have, as AAHOA members, you would have gotten it a couple of weeks ago. We've just released it more in public, but the sponsors got an early version of it, I think the middle to end of March. And part 3 is in the works right now, and we expect it to come out probably more like May. I don't think we'll have it out this month, because we were working on the Book Direct analysis, and that'll come out actually first. So this book will probably end up getting updated as an annual report going forward. And the point of it is to create a resource for the industry to really understand what is happening out there and which of the vendors are rising and which ones are declining, and how much everybody is paying for their business and how much of it is coming digitally, how much is coming through direct channels, how much is coming through indirect channels. Because all of that has very large impact on your profit contribution. I mean, very large. So just to give you an idea, the approximate cost that hotels are paying for customer acquisition is between 15 and 25% of what the guests pay. So 15 to 25% of all the money that guests are spending is spent in customer acquisition. And just to give you a frame of reference, when I started in the hotel industry, which was more than 25 years ago, it was about a 5% cost. So we're up to 15 to 25%. And different types of hotels pay different amounts. On average, it's about 16 or 17% in the US industry. but there's tons of, that's because the brands may have negotiated better rates, but there's lots of independents who are paying a lot more. So all in 15 to 25%, which is a really big number. So I'm going to just give you some definitions about the way we actually calculate the revenue. So we have what is traditionally known as the revenue that you see on your P&L. We call that hotel collected revenue. And we gross that up because there's revenue, there's money that customers pay to third parties like wholesalers or merchant model for OTA or opaque OTA. The customer actually pays it to Expedia or to Priceline or Hotwire. And then those vendors actually give you a portion of it back. So we want to account for that because the money that's paid to third parties is still paid by customers. And if we only count what shows up on the P&L, it's going to understate your average rate because if the customer pays to Expedia for a merchant model booking $100, you may only get 80 of it. Well, that 20 is a cost to you, even though you didn't write a check for it. And the 100 is really what the customer is willing to pay. So we want to keep track of that. We call that guest paid revenue because we want to separately track that because in the US market, there's a very large percentage of the OTA business that still comes in as merchant model. In fact, it's 50 to 60% of the OTA business is still that merchant model where the guest actually pays directly to Expedia in that case. We then have the third category of, let's see if I can get, the third category of revenue we call COPE revenue. And COPE is an acronym. It stands for Contribution to Operating Profit and Expense. And what that is it's the guest paid revenue after we take the wholesale commissions out, the retail commissions, loyalty costs, channel costs, transaction fees. Any of the costs that are directly associated with the transaction, we remove it. We call that COPE revenue or contribution to profit. So that's the amount that you keep after you've paid the direct cost associated with the transaction. And then we have one more type of revenue that we call net revenue. And the only other cost that hasn't been accounted for so far that we then remove at this point is called sales and marketing expense. That might be royalty costs, that's franchise fees, it's anything that you pay locally for sales and marketing. So all in, when you look at your total sales and marketing spend, it's all of those commission costs, channel costs, transaction fees, plus sales and marketing. All of that removed, and we're left with net revenue. So I'm going to talk a lot about these, so I want to make sure you're clear on what each of these categories of revenue is. We track all four because for different reasons, we want to be able to see exactly what you've got, and we want to be able to show an individual hotel how much you've actually spent for every one of those categories of expenses. So just to give you a high-level picture for the US market, this data represents the total US and the analysis that we did in the Demystifying book went through June of 2016. That's when we cut off the data and then did the analysis on it. We'll update calendar year 2016 probably in the next couple of months. But in the meantime, what we wanted to do was see how much guest paid revenue did we have, and the dark blue bar represents 2016. So the industry for the 12-month period ending June of 2016 took in $146.9 billion and ended up with net revenue of $123.3 billion. So the industry spent just under $25 billion in total customer acquisition cost. Commissions, retail commissions, wholesale commissions, transaction fees, channel costs, loyalty costs, sales and marketing expense, all in $25 billion, approximately. But you'll see that year over year, because I have the 2015 data, year over year, you'll see that guest paid revenue actually went up 4.6%, which is a very healthy growth rate. So good news for us, the industry is strong and demand is strong. Nice 4.6%. The problem is we're not keeping 4.6%. We're only keeping 4%, because when you look at the net revenue, it only went up 4%. So the difference is we are not as efficient at getting that revenue. So the guests are paying more, we're not getting to keep that difference. And we wanted to quantify and document that, and we want to continue to do that. We want to do it at an industry level. We want to do it for brands. We're working with all the brands that have given us this data to help them see what's happening. at a brand level, and now we're actually ready to start working with hotels to be able to show individual hotels exactly how much they're spending for every category of cost, to be able to understand the nature of the business that's coming into them and what they're paying. So if you look at the bottom, we call this revenue capture, and that's very simple. It's just net revenue divided by guest paid revenue. So for what the guest paid, what do you get to keep? That's really what the question is. And the answer is, in 2016, it was 83.9% in total. Now, there were some hotels that were 75%, but on average, because we had a lot of the big brands that were paying less, we were at 83.9. So one of the sort of challenges is if we look at 2015, the capture rate was 84.4. So we actually dropped, our capture rate dropped by 0.5%. And that 0.5% actually equates to $729 million across the whole US industry. So for anyone who's in the business of buying and selling hotels, you would know that that money would go straight to the bottom line, and the NOI, or the free cash flow, would be larger. And if you apply an 8 cap or some conservative capitalization rate to value that hotel, you would realize that the overall industry actually dropped in asset valuation by about $9 billion as a result of this inefficiency that we have because we're spending too much money to get our business. So we want to try, this is a cost that's a little bit hidden, like just the example of the merchant model business. You don't even know you're spending it because it doesn't show up on your P&L, for example. So what we want to do is be able to quantify it so that anyone, any operator, would be able to actually understand what they're spending, whether they write a check for it or not, they're actually spending it. And we need to start managing this cost in the same way that we've managed labor costs, because it's a huge cost, 15 to 25% of what guests pay, and we don't really have a systematic way to measure it yet. So that's what we're trying to introduce, and that's why AAHOA has been so supportive, because there have to be tools in the marketplace to look at it both at an industry level, brand level, as well as down to individual hotels. So I'm going to just give you a little overview of what's happening in terms of demand share. The way the business comes in, we identify by these different sources of business. So that would be Brand.com, GDS, OTA, voice. So voice meaning like 800 number. Property direct, and group. So those are the categories that we track. And when we look at what percentage of that business actually came digitally or came through an online platform of some kind, 42%. And when we looked at this data just 2 years ago, it was something like 36%. So there's been a very dramatic rise in the amount of business coming in through online channels. And the online channels that we're talking about are Brand.com, GDS, and OTA. Those are the 3 primary online channels. And when you look at the percentages, again, this is all through June of 2016, Brand.com was 20% of the overall business, which is very impressive. There's nowhere else in the world other than the US where we actually still have 20% of the business coming through Brand.com. Group business is about 14%, so that would be everything from economy hotels with much smaller percentages of group to the big hotels big convention hotels that may have 40 or 50% of their hotels in group. On average, group represents 14%, 14.2% of the overall business. Property direct is 34.3%. And for a lot of the economy, mid-scale, and upper mid-scale properties, property direct used to be 70%, sometimes 80% of the business. And I'm sure many of you have hotels that are in that situation. Property direct has dropped precipitously in the last 3 years. I mean, precipitously. And it's all gone to digital channels, OTA or Brand.com. And the next few years is going to tell where all that goes, because if it goes to OTA, and if those customers that used to just walk in or drive in, now you have to pay for that very same business, you have to pay 15, 17, 22%, whatever it is. This is not a great sign for the business, because property direct, I mean, 70 or 80% of your business, you don't want to give that up to a channel that suddenly, for the same exact business, now you're stuck paying very large commissions. So keeping an eye on that is very important. I think I have. So just in looking at how the patterns have changed over the last 3 years for each of these types of business, I'll just point out a few. I told you property direct has dropped off. It was almost 40% in 2014, and it dropped down to 34% So it's dropped about 13% since 2014. Brand.com has had a pretty healthy rise of 9%, but it's up to 20%, which is very strong and very good. Now, the OTA business, which is a much smaller base, so they started at 9.7% and went up to 12.4%. That is a 28% growth, but don't forget it's on a much smaller base. So yes, they're growing, and yes, they're growing quickly. But as I mentioned, for anyone who heard me earlier today, and I'll show you a few more, I'll make good on my promise to give you more of the detail that I talked about this morning. What's happened is because of these Book Direct campaigns, they worked, and Brand.com grew faster than OTA. So it is possible that that can be done. Now, whether we can keep doing it the way it was done with discounting and other kind of techniques is another story. But it worked, and the business got shifted from Brand.com, from the OTA channel to Brand.com. I don't know what will happen in the future, if that's sustainable or not. But it's important to be able to see what the patterns are. Voice was pretty much flat. GDS grew a little bit, but sort of fluctuates with the, as we all know, with the corporate kind of business pattern. FIT wholesale was pretty flat, and group was flat. So all the action is really Brand.com and OTA. That is where the action is. Voice has started to actually drop off. And the only thing that's kind of keeping it flat is because a lot of people are moving to mobile. So they go online on their phones, they get information, and they sometimes consummate the actual booking by making a phone call. So because of this shift in the nature of the business, it's really valuable to be able to look at the way that the business comes in and how the costs have changed and grown over time. So if we look just as a frame of reference, we have guest paid revenue. And what we did was index this at 2014, in 2014. So we took 2014 as the base, and we said how much did it grow from 2014. And what we see is that guest paid revenue grew 15%, which is really great, from 2014 to 2016. So again, guest paid revenue is looking really good. Guests are paying more. We just want to make sure we keep our fair share of that. So we look at the other costs, and we can see channel costs, which are like fees you pay, like a GDS fee, that sort of thing, has been pretty flat. It's grown pretty much in line with guest paid revenue. Retail commissions that are non-OTA, so I don't mean Booking.com, I mean like American Express or any retail, routine, traditional travel agent. That's grown pretty much in line with guest paid revenue as well. The two costs that have grown a little more quickly than guest paid revenue are the loyalty costs, which is not a surprise to anyone here because the loyalty programs have now been a focus for the brands to try to grow. So the loyalty cost grew at about 50% faster than guest paid revenue at 23%, but the OTA commission takes the prize for growing almost 3 times the rate of guest paid revenue. So it grew 40%, which is pretty dramatic. Now, some of you may think, well, why would it grow so much? Because the rates have come down for some of the chains. You may have gotten reductions in the commission rate. But there's much more business that's being put through the OTA channels. So the overall volume has risen, even though the commission rates have come down. So because of that, the overall expenditure on OTA commissions has grown pretty dramatically. So it's an area of concern, and it's something that needs to be managed. And it's not like, well, we have to negotiate better deals with the OTAs. This is really about looking at your business and figuring out what's the optimal business mix for your hotel and what's the demand that's available in your market that you can take to try to get a better balance so that your mix of channels provides a higher profit contribution. Instead of just passively letting anything come in that comes in, this is a way to actually make a conscious decision to go after certain kind of business and to target business. A certain amount comes through OTA, a certain amount through GDS, a certain amount through Brand.com, and then to spend money in order to do that and make sure that the money that you're spending is aligned with what your target is for each of those channels. So if we look at the costs overall, what we did was we took the direct and the indirect costs. So the direct channels are Brand.com, Voice and Property Direct, and the indirect ones are OTA, GDS, and FIT wholesale. And then we kept group separate from that. So what we did was we set Property Direct as the base. So that we set at 100 because that's the lowest cost channel. It has the least cost for anyone to acquire. And everybody, you pay something for every piece of business you get. There's nothing free. So we set that as our base. And that was 100. So what that meant is if we looked at how much we were spending on voice and Brand.com, Brand.com was about 2.5 times the cost of Property Direct. So the index for Brand.com is 263. Property Direct, again, is our base, and that's 100. If we contrast that with the indirect channels, and we look at OTA, the index for OTA is 687. So that's almost 7 times the cost for each booking, almost 7 times what we pay for Property Direct, which means that the guy sitting in the parking lot or sitting in the lobby on their phone with Expedia to do their booking would have been essentially 0 cost, and now you're paying 7 times as much. I mean, that's essentially what I'm telling you. So OTA is about 7 times the base of Property Direct. GDS index is at about 5 times. FIT wholesale is almost 6 times. And then group is about double. So that's just to give you a kind of comparison as far as what the costs are. That's kind of generally the comparison between your direct and indirect costs. So the indirect costs are really kind of 2.5 to 3 times what your direct costs are. So one of the things that has never been measured in our industry before, and we're now going to be measuring this going forward, is the percentage of loyalty contribution. And I mentioned this earlier today. Loyalty contribution is the percentage of room nights that come from loyalty guests. Very simple. So what percentage base do you have in your hotel that comes through the loyalty, that has loyalty associated with it? And I was actually very surprised to see how strong the loyalty percentages are. So economy, a lot of the economy brands are just introducing loyalty programs, and they're new, and they're not fully developed. So they're the lowest at kind of just reaching a little over 15% in 2016. But the growth rate within the economy segment is the greatest. I mean, the growth rate is tremendous at 32%. So those loyalty programs are picking up steam and actually getting much more traction. If we look from mid-scale through luxury, the range is 40 to 60% contribution from loyalty, which is very significant. That means the base of business that you have is loyalty related. So you heard me this morning, I said loyalty contribution is the new system contribution. That's really a fact of life. If you can lay a base of 50 or 60% that come through the loyalty program, you don't have as much to fill in on top of that. And if the loyalty programs grow to be 70 or 80%, you only have 20 or 25% to fill, which means that even if you take higher cost channels, you won't mess with your overall economics very much because it's on a much smaller base of your business. So this is a really good thing. And to me, one of the biggest outcomes that I saw of these Book Direct campaigns is what a high percentage the brands have been able to shift and to grow as far as the loyalty business. And yes, you pay for the loyalty guest, but, and I know you pay with free water and breakfast and other stuff that you have to do operationally. I know all those costs. The actual loyalty fee that you pay may be 3 to 5%. You may pay some of those operational costs on top of it, but the alternative is to pay 14, 15, 16, 17% through a third party with no guarantee they're going to recur at all. You just have to keep cycling through and getting more of them. So in spite of all those added costs, it is by far a better deal. The question is, how viable is it? What can you do to keep these guests coming back? And how can the loyalty programs actually grow and not be driven just by discounts, which is what the Book Direct campaign started with, which is not sustainable going forward. So this is one of the most exciting findings for me for the study was how high the base is and how quickly it's growing. So you can see the growth rates generally between 5 and 8%, which is strong and getting stronger. So because all the brands are focused on enhancing their loyalty program now, so I think that's good for everybody. So if we look at a little bit of it by differences by tier or by type of hotel, the upper tier is luxury, upper upscale and upscale hotels. We call that the upper tier. The middle tier is upper mid-scale hotels, and the lower tier is mid-scale and economy. We grouped them together because their behavior was very similar, so it made sense to look at them together. So one of the things I'll point out with the lower tier hotels, this is RevPAR numbers that we're looking at. And we're comparing the guest paid RevPAR with the hotel collected and the COPE RevPAR. So what we want to try to figure out, and we never look at just the traditional RevPAR, we always want to look at it on a net basis, and we want to look at the guest paid version of that because it's a much more meaningful number. So if we look at the lower tier, the guest paid RevPAR actually grew 4.1%. That's really good. I told you guest paid revenue's been really strong. So this is lower tier. I'm talking economy and mid-scale hotels right now. The hotel collected RevPAR grew 3.6%, which is okay, but it meant that, it didn't grow as fast as guest paid, which meant that we were paying a lot of wholesale commissions in there. And then when we see what the COPE RevPAR, which is really the net RevPAR, we're down to 3.1% growth, which meant, again, we had 4.1% growth in RevPAR. If we were really efficient in the way we were getting our business, we'd have growth of our net COPE RevPAR at 4.1%. Only it was 3.1%. So we had the biggest gap of all hotel types at the lower tier. Because even though it had the strongest growth in what the guests paid, which is awesome and great, we did the worst job in being efficient about getting that business. And I'll tell you the two main things that contributed to it, which I mentioned earlier. The property direct business went to OTA. And within OTA, every single chain scale reduced their opaque business from 2014 to 2016, somewhere between 15 and 25% drop in opaque business. Economy chain scale was the only chain scale that actually grew opaque business by 6%. So for whatever it's worth, it cost a lot to get that business. And the efficiency with which the business was acquired, I mean, it's great that guests were willing to pay so much more, but we have to really think about how we want to bring that business in, because we want to bring it in channels that deliver a higher profit contribution. And with this increase in opaque and the higher cost channels, you're bringing it in, but you're just not keeping it. You're just not keeping enough of it. So again, looking at the lower tier, just as an example, we can look at the blue line up at the top. I'm going to point that out and tell you what we're seeing there. The green line represents middle tier, and the red line represents the upper tier. So this is what we call a direct-indirect ratio. So the question is, how many direct bookings do you take for every one that's taken indirectly? And for the lower tier, again, this is economy and mid-scale, in 2014, there were 5.9 direct bookings for every one booked indirectly. By 2016, that number had come down to 4. So it's a 33% drop. And again, it all came to what I just finished telling you. The property direct is just, whew, it's like a whooshing sound toward OTA. Some of it's going to Brand.com with these book direct campaigns, but a lot of it's gone into OTA. For the middle tier, it went from 3.6 direct bookings down to 2.9, and the least change was in the luxury, upper upscale, and upscale group, which had 2 direct bookings for every one booked indirectly. Of course, their base, they started much lower, and it dropped about 8% down to 1.8. So that's just a big picture in terms of what's happening by chain scale. So just overall summary on the different tiers. The upper tier by far had the strongest revenue capture performance, so they kept the most of what they actually took in. They had the largest reduction in opaque OTA, and they had the biggest increase in Brand.com. That combination was a winning combination. It made them very efficient. Reduce opaque, increase Brand.com, it's a recipe for success. It works, and it worked really well. Brand.com grew faster than OTA, as I said earlier, for the first time in 5 years. The middle and the lower tier had a different experience. Even though the guest paid revenue grew the fastest, the retention of that, the revenue capture, was the lowest. And again, that's because of the property direct just sloughing off and going straight into the higher cost channels. And as I said, economy was the only tier that actually grew opaque OTA. So I'm going to just give you a little bit on Book Direct, and then the last thing I'm going to do is give you some tactical tips for things you can do to shift your channels, to shift the business within the business mix. So on the Book Direct, I promised you some follow-up from my teaser statement, so I'll refresh you on what I showed you earlier. We look at what happened with Brand.com and OTA. If we look at the top blue lines, that represents Brand.com. The orange lines at the bottom represent OTA. The dashed lines are the 2015 actual. The solid line is 2016 actual. So you can see that the Brand.com, and this is Brand.com loyalty only. Brand.com grew more than twice the rate of OTA. There's now a gap. It used to be 3 to 9 points difference between Brand.com and OTA. It's now 5 to 10 points. So it really made a very notable statistical difference. So this was the question I brought up this morning. What would 2016 hotel performance would have been without Book Direct? So what we did was we took the data for the last 3 years for 12,000 hotels. We looked at every hotel individually because there were big differences. And we projected out a regression analysis to be able to say, if nothing changed and we were on the same trajectory as we were on for the last 3 years, what would have happened? No Book Direct, no nothing, nothing changed, what would have happened? And we know that the OTA growth had been quite strong. So what would that have looked like? So I'm going to show you the 2015 actual that we had looked at. The OTA actual is the orange line at the bottom, the dashed line. The dotted line is the forecast. So that's what would have happened with OTA if we had projected on this regression analysis. That's what we would have seen with the OTA business. So it would have been higher than 2015 actual. And we look at what happened with Brand.com, above it in blue. 2015 actual is the dashed line, and the regression forecast that we made is the dotted line. So both of them were expected to be higher. The OTA business was expected to be quite a bit higher than the previous year, than 2015. Brand.com was going to be higher, but not by as much. So now I'm going to overlay what really happened. So this is what really happened. This is what we looked at before in the actual. So you can see that the solid line at the bottom for OTA actually came in under what the regression model showed. So it was above, the actual we saw before was above 2015, but it was well below what would have happened otherwise. And then we look at Brand.com and we see the dashed line was 2015. We forecast to do better, but what really happened was substantially better than that. So for anyone who says, oh, these Book Direct campaigns didn't work, they worked. I mean, they worked. So you may complain that you paid too much to get this. You can complain about all kinds of things. But consumers changed their behavior, and we were able to shift channel. And that's meaningful. And the amounts were significant. So the OTA business was below what was forecasted. The Brand.com was above. And that was the outcome everybody kind of hoped to see. And I'll get into some of what the costs are associated with this. So this goes to the point I made this morning. What are we really paying for? Like, what do we really want to get when we acquire our business? Do we want to just buy transactions and just cycle through customers? Or do we really want to get a recurring guest? Like, do we want to, if we're going to pay money to get a guest, would we rather get a cash annuity of somebody who's going to keep coming back, who we have a relationship with? Or do we just want to keep getting a transaction every single time? And I think everybody would probably agree the recurring guest is a much better base of business if you can get it. And the question is, can you get it? And how much do you have to pay to get it? Because it always comes down to that. You know, how efficiently can we get that business? And again, I'll repeat what I said earlier today. You have to look at the lifetime value of these customers. You can't just look at them on a transaction-by-transaction basis. Because if we're just assuming there's no residual value in any customer relationship we have, they just come in and we never know if we're going to see them again. Or we are investing to give a value, to have a value so that we see them 3 or 4 times, if not in our hotel, in one of our sister hotels or sister brand hotels. So the lifetime value has to be greater than the cost of the first visit. If you pay too much to get it and over 3 years or 4 years, they're not bringing in enough to make up for that, it's a bad deal. So the lifetime value has to be greater than what it takes to get them in the first place. And it's not like there's no cost in getting them to come back. You're still paying those loyalty costs and everything else. It's a smaller amount. So if you pay a bigger amount the first time, and then you're paying a smaller amount for their next 3 or 4 visits, when you add it all together, the question is that total value more than what we ended up having to pay to get them? And the assumption and the theory is yes, that's a better deal. So now I'm going to give you actual numbers. We actually ran those costs, and we said, this wasn't for free, these book direct campaigns. You paid, and everyone, I've talked to a bunch of you after the session this morning. I know you paid. It wasn't free, and it wasn't perfect, and it wasn't positive for everyone. There were hotels that it was positive, and they came out net positive across the board. And there were others that when you add in all the discount and all those costs, you ended up paying something. So the question is, how much did you pay? So on average, the costs were between $20,000 and $40,000 for the 8-month period per hotel. So the lower end hotels with the lower rates were paying, I don't know, $18,000 to $20,000, and the higher end hotels were paying more like $40,000 to $42,000. So let's just take a mid-scale type hotel that's paying $20,000. The real question is, how many loyalty guests do you have to get to make up for that cost? Like, how many more loyalty guests would you have to add to make it worthwhile, that they would keep coming back, that you would get more value out of them? So the answer is, it's 35 to 70 new members. So let's just say it's a $20,000 cost for your hotel. And let's say you get 50 to 70 new loyalty members. Well, some of them aren't going to come back. They just signed up for the loyalty program to get the discount. But 25 or 30% of them, just to be conservative, because now I'm collecting data from the brands, and it's probably higher than that, but let's say 30%, end up coming back. And they end up looking just like a regular loyalty guest. That's all good. So let's say you need to get 100 of them in order to keep 30. And on average, the value of a loyalty member is between $500 and $1,000. And I run all these numbers, so you'll have to use this just as general guideline. Let's say 500. So if it's worth $500 for every new per year that you get out of each new loyalty member, how many of them do you really need to get to make it worthwhile? I mean, 50 of them? And that's about 25,000. So is it realistic for you to get 50 new members in your hotel in that 8-month period? For some hotels, maybe not. But for some hotels, that's probably not a very hard target to hit. So if you get 50 new members that recur and you're trying to cover a cost of $20,000, that's a worthwhile exercise. If your costs were $80,000 and you could only get 20 new members, well, that's a bad deal. So for each hotel, it's a different calculation, but on average, and this was actually the median was about 20,000, let's say. It didn't seem like it would be that hard to get that number of loyalty members to make up for it. It's sort of like, think of it like a marketing campaign. So given those facts, and given the very clear-cut shift in the business from into Brand.com and away from the third parties, I would have to say that these programs worked. But we ran this for 12,000 hotels, and I can tell you it was a bell curve. So we had most of the hotels around the median. Some a little more positive, some a little more negative. We had some on the long tail of the bell curve that were outside the normal range. Some were really, really positive and made a lot of money. It was just all positive, everything good. And some of them were losers, and they really didn't do very well at all. And if I were owners of that hotel, I'd be really upset. But when you think about how many that was, it might have been 100 hotels out of the 12,000. I'm not saying that if you're the owner of one of those 100 hotels, you're not going to be unhappy, because if I was an owner of one of those hotels, I'd be unhappy. But given that there were 12,000 hotels and there were a couple hundred hotels at either end, it was across the board, I would have to say that this was a positive thing. Now, what we really need to think about, and I think I mentioned that this morning, using discounts as an incentive to get loyalty members to sign up is probably not a sustainable path. because discounts never lead to, then somebody gives another discount and they go down some other path. They'll join a loyalty program for an OTA or something. So I think that the future in terms of these book direct campaigns is going to be in providing services that don't cost the owner money, where there's digital services that are provided, like mobile check-in or keyless entry or choose your own room. Things within the apps of the brand that consumers really get hooked on and want to use, and it just makes the travel experience so convenient and so seamless that it's just easier to book that way and easier to book on the brand. But I think using discounts is probably not the way to go. So I'm going to just stop for a second and see if there's questions before I move to the last piece, which is the kind of tactical suggestions. And I know we have to, yes?
In your research, were you able to track, because we're assuming that these are new members, so either club members or whatever the new, the lowest tier is.
Yeah.
Were you able to track how much of that specific tier came back and actually, visited multiple times and if actually helped you well with that tier? Because everybody else, if you're traveling 100 rooms, 100 nights a year, you're on the high levels anyway, so those people will stay with us regardless.
Right.
The new ones that we want to capture.
Right, so it's still pretty early. I mean, I'm talking to the brands to try to get some of those results because there are not enough months have passed to actually capture how many times they've recurred. But it's been a pretty good result for most of the brands, and I can't say across the board because I don't have data from all of them. And there's a whole bunch of those customers that will never come back because they signed up just to get the discount. But for the portion that sign up that recur, our anecdotal evidence that we've gotten just from talking to the brands is there's a substantial percentage that have come back 2 and 3 times already. So, but it's going to be a subset. It's going to be 25 or 30% of the total for sure. So you have to calculate that when you figure out, is this worth it or not for you? So I know we're really close to, we have a little bit of time. So the thing that I want to, everybody when I was here last time had said, what can we do? Like, give me some ideas of things we can do. So we've been working with a whole bunch of the brands at an enterprise level, but we've started doing pilots at the property level, and we've developed kind of a playbook of things that people have done successfully. And as I said, it's not the answer is not renegotiate your Expedia deal. There's much more that can be done at a property level. So I'm going to run you through examples, and then I'm going to share this with AAHOA so that you can have access to these items. So again, what is the type of opportunity that's available to you? You have to look by source of business and look at your overall opportunity. So, the overall thought process is to pick your need periods, whether it's occupancy or ADR related, and then look at your pricing and rate shopping to just look to see where you're really out of line with what's going on in your market. And I know most of you probably know these things, but I'll just recap the whole list. Sometimes during underperforming occupancy periods, which are slower times, or really high demand periods, the range of rates of what you offer could be widened so that during high demand periods, there's more options for consumers to choose from and higher ranges of rates to choose from, whether it's room types or some other kind of way that you can differentiate the room types that are available. During strong demand periods, sometimes there's a hesitancy to put the rates up too much, like everyone's just hesitant to do it. And I know sometimes, there's bad press when somebody in a big activity, some event going on in a city puts the rates up too much and then gets a lot of bad press around it. But there's general hesitancy to put pricing up, and you shouldn't be so hesitant to do it, during the high demand periods. Having premium products is easier to do it, but just putting the rates up little bits at a time is worth doing. And that multiplied by many room nights can go pretty far to improving your profit contribution. So just getting into some specific, channel-specific suggestions. So for Brand.com, and again, some of this you may think, oh, of course I know it, but sometimes it's a good refresher. Content and photos, everything is about merchandising, so take a fresh look at what you're doing to merchandise on Brand.com and just see is there something you can do to update and make sure that you've got a fresh view and it's not just the same standard old photos that you've had. Incentives to book direct and signups for loyalty. I mean, obviously the brands are doing that, but anything that you can do when you have a guest who comes in through the OTA channel and you want to try to get them to book direct, give them an incentive to come back so they don't sit in the parking lot or sit in the front desk again, booking on Expedia when here they are in your very own hotel. And then, again, for weekday OTA customers, provide incentives to get them to book direct, coming back on weekends and during typical times when leisure OTA business comes in. On the OTA side, there are, even though we mainly have Expedia and we mainly have Priceline, TripAdvisor has come in the market, for example, and generally you have a lower cost for a TripAdvisor booking. So start looking at your different, you've got opaque business, and you can get business through a lot of other OTA channels without opaque, and you're paying double the cost for an opaque piece of business. So you may not realize that, but just cutting out the opaque had a huge impact on the revenue capture of the upper upscale hotels in the last 2 years. So for economy and mid-scale hotels to start really getting much more strict about when you take opaque business, it's not just good, it's not worth filling a room that you can fill with a higher profit margin channel. So, I mean, you could take Expedia merchant model and make more money than you would for a Hotwire booking, and you're going to get the same, whether it's the same customer or not. That may sound like common sense, but sometimes you just have to think about it. One of the ways you can do it is if you use OTA marketing, do it further out so you're more likely to get that merchant model business instead of at the last minute just filling with the opaque. So if you can fill with the OTA merchant model business further out, you get that base there, then you're less inclined to get nervous and feel like you've got to fill up with the opaque in the short run, in the short term. Many of the brands have blackout dates. They don't have last room availability anymore, and I know a lot of the brands in this room are in that situation. So if you don't have last room availability requirements where you have to keep the OTAs open, and wherever you have blackout dates, when you have high demand dates, don't take it. Like, you're going to fill up, so why should you pay the extra premium when you can get the business through your direct channels? So when you have an option to close it out, close it out. Just, the business will come through other channels during high demand periods. So don't take it, just leave it open, because people are like, you've been told, and a lot of the market managers will say, oh, just leave it open because it'll just fill you up. Well, you don't want to just get filled up on low profit margin kind of business. If you can get better business coming in during that same time, you want to fill up on the higher profit margin stuff. So use your blackout dates and use your restrictions whenever you can. Property direct. Any way that you can do online upselling, if you have any mechanism within your website and your booking engine to do upselling, any sort of upselling, early arrival, late departure, if you have room types that enable you to offer a premium product. Upsell training for the front desk. I mean, this is something that's been done for many, many years, but I'll tell you, it works. If there's things you can do to get the front desk to be willing to get someone to sign up for the loyalty program, get someone to book their next booking through a direct channel, the bounce back, you have an OTA guest, you get them to sign up for the loyalty program on the spot. The front desk could get paid for doing those things. Small incentives, but they get paid, they'll pay attention if they get small incentives. It works really, really well. And then the other thing is for the front desk, if they're trained to tell somebody I have seen this myself where I've been at front desks and I said, I see on Expedia your rate is $99 and you're telling me the rate is $129. I'm standing right in front of you. If you give me the $99 rate, I'll book direct. And the front desk clerk has told me, just book it on Expedia. And I want to slit my wrist. I mean, I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, you don't know who you're talking to here. Like, you don't tell me to book on Expedia when you've got the potential to just, the front desk has to be empowered to do that. They have to understand the difference. But clearly, and this has happened 3 or 4 times, and I've been told this story from others that it happened to. There's just no reason for it. So you've got a guest who's coming in, and they're saying, I have I can get a rate through Hotel Tonight or whatever it is. It's like, don't book through the third party. We'll take it directly. And in fact, sign up for the loyalty program, and we'll make sure you are part of the loyalty program and get all those benefits. But the front desk has to know that, and they have to be empowered to do it. On the GDS side, if you have booking links for corporate negotiated accounts through your brand, use those links. Get them to book through brand.com, because then you don't pay the GDS fee. If the GDS advertising works, you can see if it increases production, but don't just do it if it's not turning anything up for you. GDS business can be very high profit business. It is more costly, but it tends to come in at a higher rate. It's a very good business. From a third party point of view, that's first on the list. And then you want to just make sure that whatever you do as far as placement within the GDS ranking, if you have relationships or any kind of relationships with the travel agencies where you're listed, you want to try to get yourself, do whatever you can to try to get listed higher. On the voice, whether that's in-house or 800 number, make sure that at the top, the first rates that are quoted are higher rated flexible rates. So you start out by offering those, and then you fade, as they say, and come into the lower rates. But if you start with the flexible rates that tend to be higher rated, you may get somebody to stop at the higher rate rather than starting with the lower rate, and they just take it, and then you've never had the chance of selling them anything better. Any kind of discounts or special deals that you have should always be at the tail end, not offered up front, because you don't know on a voice situation what somebody's really looking for. On the group side, for those of you who deal with group business, a lot of times on the weekends, especially like social group business, it's a lot of social groups like soccer moms and all those kind of people. They'll get everybody together to book for everybody to come and stay at the Comfort Inn. And how do they all book? Oh, they just book on Expedia. And it's like, whoa. You know, if you could try to encourage those kind of groups, which everybody's got these social kind of groups, reunions, soccer teams, bands and competitions, I mean, all of those kind of things. Offer lower group pricing on the weekends. Give them a way to be able to do it. Try to get a contact who's involved, because the alternative is they're going to go through a third party. You're going to pay way more. So again, those are just some examples, and we will share those with the group. And I want to thank everyone very much for your attention. And we have a few minutes for questions, or
Maybe one or two questions. We only have a few minutes before the next session starts, so we can take one or two.
Encourage that we should always make the customer book direct with us and offer the best rate available. Why is brand not working on that base, offering the best rate available on their website versus OTAs offering the lower rate? Why can't be vice versa? But the brand is offering the best rate, so even online, the guest is looking for, they'll go direct with our own brand. Why is that difference?
so you want to repeat the question? Yeah. So the question is, if the OTAs are always offering the lowest rate, why don't the brands also do the same thing? Where,
The brand offers the lower rate than OTAs, so the customer will always be directed towards brand versus the OTAs.
so the brands have been offering lower rates and the member rates, so that's a new thing that they've started to do. But consumers still have this idea that it's cheaper on the OTA. And I think the brands have started to move everybody to realize that you can get a better deal on brand.com. But it's a slow process to get the consumers to shift over in their way of thinking.
And this is our last question. Cindy, right over
Okay.
here.
Yes, one question that I was concerned about, the direct shift, did it take into account that most of the OTAs, because the brands are offering lower price, and I'll use a city like San Antonio where you've probably got, say, 1,000 hotels. Many of these lower scale hotels, middle, They're now where they may have been the top 5 listed on Expedia Priceline. Now they're the bottom 5. Visibility is gone. Obviously, the OTAs is going to be less. But there's many hotels, and I do revenue management for them. Book Direct is raised at 10%, but the OTA business is down 40%. Their net is a loss of 30%. So it's like you've shut the door to the OTAs. And where I live, and I'll use the example of Augusta, Georgia last week. Everybody knows what was going on in Augusta last week. Hotels that had rooms available the last day, they open it on every channel. They don't sell it on Book Direct. It's the OTAs that sell it first because, as you said this morning, they've got the $6 billion budgets. So I think part of the brand direct strategy was don't even show the OTA business.
Well, and I would never say that you shouldn't, like, there's always a mix of business, and you always are going to get business from every different source. It's not like, oh, just cut out OTA and get everything direct. It's just for every hotel, there's an optimal business mix. There's the right amount of OTA and the right amount of Brand.com given the competitive situation for that hotel and the demand in that market. So for some hotels, the right amount of OTA could be 25%. For another hotel, it may be 5%. And really, it's on the hotel to figure out what's the right mix for your hotel and spend the money accordingly and get as good a mix as possible. But I wouldn't say you shouldn't book third-party business. Sure, you're going to book OTA, and you can get it. And yes, can it get out of balance the other direction? Yes, it can. So you want to make sure that the balance between all of the channels is appropriate given the demand in the market.
One of the problems is the individual franchisees are not choosing to do that. The brands are mandating that you offer lower on this. The OTAs are basically eliminating you from their site.
I understand.
So that's what's creating a negative effect on your bottom line.
I understand. Yeah, no, it's a dynamic that's not a simple one. I mean, it has a chain reaction that affects every single source of business. But I think we're going to have to
We
wrap
are
up.
out
So I'm
of
gonna say
time,
thank you all
unfortunately.
very
But let's
much.
give Cindy a round of applause.
Thank you.
Cindy will be available offline for a few questions. If you
Yeah.
do want to come up, she'll be right over here to the corner. Here's a small token of our appreciation. Thank you,
very
Cindy,
much.
for your time.
Thank you.
The next session starts here in the next 5 minutes. Let's talk about money will be the next session in here. And there are other sessions going around on the second floor also. Have a good day.